Okay, so welcome to another edition of Real Estate Investor Talk, and I'm sitting here in Johannesburg with Michelle Dickens. Michelle is the Managing Director of Tenant Profile Network, TPN. They offer a very critical service to property managers and to landlords in South Africa for property investors and owners. Michelle, welcome, and I think tell us a little bit about TPN and what you've built, because you've built an incredible business and a service which you're offering both to landlords and to estate agents.
Thanks, Neale. TPN is a registered credit bureau, and we profile tenant behaviour information. The idea is that we need to understand tenant behaviour before the tenant moves into the property. So we profile the tenant on a monthly basis, how they pay their rent every month. We understand where they rent, how much the rent is, and we categorize the rent payment by paid on time, partially paid, paid late or not paid. We pull all that into a database, and then anyone who's looking for a prospective tenant is able to search that particular tenant's details, and we'll pull all that into a credit report from a tenant perspective, and then allow property managers and landlords to profile their tenants prior to placing. Because as you know, it's very important to place a quality tenant. Once the tenant's in and there's a problem, it's far more expensive to deal with a delinquent tenant. We want to place quality tenants up front.
So tell me how about the business actually came about, because I mean you obviously identified a gap, and what you're telling the viewers out there is it's a critical service that you're offering there. So tell us how it all started.
So my background was in property management, studied accounts, started articles and discovered numbers was not my game. Into property management, I'm a people person.
Mm-hmm.
Into property management, 5 years in property management dealing with delinquent tenants. And I remember the breaking point dealing with Mr. Chris, who was not paying his rent, and I was on the way over to the property to say, Mr. Chris, you need to pay or move. And as it turned out, Mr. Chris was moving, and he was moving from number 13 into number 14. He was no longer my problem, but he was now going to be another agent's problem. And I thought there must be a way where we can communicate with each other, and it must be bigger than just communicating with our small agencies that operate around us. It needs to be national. And hence TPN. It's a database. We all join it. We all feed our data into it, and we can then all access the data out of it. We've now got close to 10,000 property managers and landlords around South Africa contributing to that database and pulling data from it.
Wow. Tell us a little bit about the statistics between landlords and estate agents, and kind of the thinking behind why landlords are not using estate agents and property managers out there.
So as we know, the census has recently been published. We've got 14.5 million households in South Africa, of which 25% are in rented accommodation.
Right.
So that's a big population in rented accommodation. So we're looking at about 1.6 million properties in the formerly rented industry, of which 70% are still managed by the landlord.
Wow.
Only 30% by property managers.
That's incredibly high.
And one has to ask the question, as you did, why are estate agents not managing more properties on behalf of landlords? Because when you look at that 70%, the majority, 75% of those are micro landlords. They have between 1 and 10 properties, and they are doing those property management collections themselves. And we feel, we've done a survey, we've asked landlords this question, and the response coming back is that they didn't feel that the estate agent had their best interests at heart.
Wow.
And of course all the negative publicity with the Auctions Alliance, the wedding mechanics at the moment, hasn't helped.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, so tell us also a little bit more about the stats in terms of delinquent stats, and in which areas are they in? The sort of the low rental areas? Is it in the high rentals? Just run through the latest stats report. I know you just released it now recently.
Quarter 3 of 2012 rental payment monitor stats. We look at the overall national average. So how do tenants pay overall? And it's pleasing to see that 83% of tenants are in good standing. A good standing tenant is a tenant that is paid by month end. 68% of those are paid on time and in full. And then we've got the paid late category making up our total of 83%. We then look at the data across the different provinces and across the different rental brackets. And consistently the below 3,000 Rand tenant per month is below 3,000 Rand per month tenant is the most difficult to collect rent from.
Right.
The tenant in the upper end of the market, 12,000, is not quite as bad, but also very difficult to collect rent from. It's the tenants between the 3,000 and 7,000 and 7,000 and 12,000 that consistently are the easiest to collect rent from.
Right.
We then look at the different provinces. Eastern Cape and Western Cape traditionally are the easiest provinces to collect rent from. Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal always lag behind the average.
Wow.
And when you
Why
look
do you think
at
that?
Well, when you look at
Mm-hmm.
the indebtedness of the Gauteng province particularly, they're 4 times more indebted
Wow.
from a credit perspective
Sure.
than the other provinces. So
That's
the
interesting.
Gauteng takes up 46, in terms of the National Credit Regulator stats, from Q2, Gauteng takes up 46% of all credit lent
Wow.
in South Africa.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's incredible.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, what you're telling now is very important information for an investor out there, because you've said now in that 3,000 to 7,000 rand month category. If I was an investor, I'd say, well,
That's where you wanna rent.
that's what I want to. That's what I want to buy,
Yeah.
and that's the
That's
tenant
it.
that I want to rent.
That's
Pretty
it.
much so.
That's
Would you
exactly
say?
right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So just tell us a little bit more. I mean, because your service is a critical service. I mean, I can't see a reason why somebody should not use it.
Exactly. Because your investment is all about the tenant that you placed.
Yeah.
A non-paying
Yeah.
tenant equals no rent, no income, no bond, no expenses, no levies are going to get paid.
Yeah.
So after picking your property, after picking your investment, the next thing you must ensure is a quality tenant. And the only way to understand a tenant's performance is by looking at his past performance,
Right.
because a leper generally doesn't change his spot.
Sure. So are you also playing a little bit of an educational role for landlords and estate
Definitely.
agents? Okay.
Definitely.
Because I know you got your lease packs and all that. Tell us a little bit about
Definitely.
that.
So we do monthly training sessions. I think it's important that our members are able to interpret the data that we give them. So monthly we do free monthly training sessions. We then have a lease pack product that we put out there for 350 Rand. You can get access to 16 different documents that you need to rent your property.
Wow.
Your leases, CPA compliant, non-CPA, your mandates, your inspection docs, your application docs, resolution sureties, the list goes on.
Fantastic.
With that, we've now built in a wiki on top of the lease. So if you need to understand why a certain clause is in the lease, or your landlord or your tenant doesn't understand the clause, they simply mouse over that, either the Word or the PDF version that you send them, you mouse over it. That'll take them into the TPN wiki, which will tell them this is why the clause is there. This is in terms of CPA, NCA, FICA, whatever act it relates to. These are the sections that it relates to. If you want to edit it, we say, well, legally you can't, because it's a right that the tenant or landlord has. Or yes, this is something that could possibly be edited in terms of legislation.
Okay. Give us a little bit of tips now, just in closing, because I know we could carry on chatting about the whole day. Because obviously, from an investor perspective, you're an investor yourself, and you're in the market, and I think that's a critical point here. And tell us a little bit about, both from your personal investor perspective and what you could share for others. Give them some tips and advice for people managing properties, what they should be doing.
Well, the first thing is, if you're a new investor and you're getting into property at the moment, you've got to do your homework in terms of identifying which property you want, which area you want. You've got to understand your yields, your levies, the other expenses that are going to go into that investment. You've got to understand what your potential rental income is before you determine what your calculations is on whether or not that's a good investment. Once you've got your property, the next step is you've got to do your credit checks, your tenant checks, to make sure you're placing quality tenant. And that goes more than just the TPN check and the TransUnion check. It also speaks to your affordability assessment. Because a quality tenant might be a quality tenant at 4,000 Rand, but at 5,000 Rand, he might not be a quality tenant anymore.
Right.
So you've got to understand your affordability assessment up front. And the maintenance of the property is key critical. The better maintained your property is, the better your tenant will perform. Because tenants that feel that you aren't maintaining the property are likely to say, well, I'm going to withhold rent to get your interest back, and to encourage you to do maintenance issues. And that's not something we want to be seeing in the marketplace.
And I think just one thing I just want to add is that you mentioned about you've got quite a good relationship with all your tenants.
Yes.
You've developed a good
Yes.
and
Yes.
as a result they become a good tenant.
Correct. Communication is critical.
Mm.
You've got to be communicating with your tenant on a monthly basis, even
Mm.
if it's just to send out the rental invoice,
Mm-hmm.
so that the tenant is hearing from you on a monthly basis. And when your tenant phones, answer the call.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've got my tenants' details on my phone, on
Mm-hmm.
my cell phone, so I
Mm-hmm.
know when they're phoning me, and I always pick up the phone and answer them and address any issues that they might have.
Fantastic. Michelle, thank you very much for the opportunity. I think it's great. I think for anybody that wants to get more information, you go to the TPN website, www.tpn.co.za. Am I right?
That's absolutely right.
Also, if you want the lease pack and commercial pack. But Michelle, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Neale.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank